Non-precision approaches. It is well known that non-precision approaches may have a minimum descent altitude, MDA, in which the aircraft is leveled off and maintained until one has visual contact with the runway. Once visual contact is established, the aircraft may descend towards the threshold, transitioning from a descent to a level flight, and from a level flight to a descent again on a short approach, bears the characteristics of a non-stabilized approach. With radio navigation equipment available these days, a descent path can be created with which the aircraft descends to reach the MDA at a point where, if the runway is in sight, the descent can be continued without interruption on a normal glide path towards the touchdown point. We do not mean to invent new types of approaches. What we mean is a more efficient and safer use of existing approach procedure. High-speed approaches. Those pilots who are used to fly into busy hubs know it too well. ATC often requests to maintain an above-normal airspeed during the arrival phase of the approach. To prevent non-stabilized approaches from happening, here is a set of recommendations. Stick to your limits. Do not accept a request by air traffic control that you cannot comply with. Start with the idea that you must be stabilized on a 3-mile final. That means stabilize speed, configuration, and thrust. Once cleared to reduce airspeed at the pilot's discretion, do it immediately and quickly. Do not reduce speed slowly, because you may end up on a short final with high speed and reduced thrust. Follow on the animated profile a typical, well-timed high-speed approach. Select flaps 9 degrees at approximately 3 miles to intercepting the outer marker. Set gear down. Reduce power to idle. At 200 knots, ask for flaps 22 degrees. At 145 knots, ask for flaps 45 degrees. This is your landing configuration, which must be established at 3 miles from the touchdown point. Upon setting flaps to 45 degrees, adjust power to maintain at least VAPP and cross the runway threshold at VRAP. Use the proper technique to touch down in the 1,000-foot landing area. Circling approach. Circling approaches are very demanding. They're often very tight maneuvers that may end up in very short finals at the wrong height and wrong speed that can induce the pilot to use power off, steep paths towards the runway. And to complicate the matter further, sometimes the runway is at the side opposite to the flying pilot, and he only sees the runway when turning into final, when it may be too late to make corrections. Therefore, the most important thing to be observed in a circling approach is to be at the right height and right speed when intercepting final approach. Follow these rules to get it. Plan ahead. Estimate how many seconds after passing a beam threshold you will extend the downwind leg. Estimate how much you must descend on the base leg. The crew must have the runway in sight at all times. If the flying pilot does not see the runway, the non-flying pilot must advise immediately whenever the aircraft is getting too far, too close, too low, or too high relative to the runway. If the runway disappears in the mist or in the clouds, a missed approach is mandatory. Never, ever let the aircraft climb out of the downwind altitude through the cloud ceiling. If that ever happens, a missed approach must be carried out. Minimize configuration and speed changes during the approach. Most important of all, if, when on final approach, the aircraft is found not properly positioned, never try steep approaches or too shallow approaches towards the touchdown point. And never, ever do it powered on. Windy approaches. High-intensity surface winds are usually accompanied by turbulence and gusts. The problem is to have a speed margin capable of covering any drop of aerodynamic speed due to wind change. Wind shifting and changes of intensity may require thrust changes. However, these thrust changes must be done at the proper timing and magnitude, as we have discussed before, remembering that jet engines respond slowly to acceleration requirements when compared to turboprop. Excessive elevator inputs must be avoided. Normally, larger elevator inputs are not required even in gusty approaches. Playing too much with the elevator will result in unsteady, unstabilized approaches. The Embraer regional jets were designed with the turboprop pilot in mind. It was designed to be safe to operate by pilots without previous experience in jets. And the end result is an aircraft that is simple to manage and that has excellent handling characteristics. In some aspects, it is even easier to handle than the average high-performance turboprop. Fly these planes and you will confirm that. We believe we have reached our goal of getting you, airman, a level of information very important for you to understand each part of a whole, somewhat complex environment. In the process of learning, sometimes it is necessary to break down, fragment the information given, and then study the parts the way we've just done. But information alone is nothing without practice. Gathering knowledge is useless if not put into practical terms. We have given information so that you can integrate it with your skills and you will be successful in the dynamic environment of the skies. Embraer wishes you a good flight.